Hello my friends, welcome to my channel, Lindy's Magpie Reads. So I have got 5 books to tell you about today and 1 cake. If you've been following the cake saga, I made another cake from You Are Human and You Need Cake. This is the 3rd time that I've made the lemon pound cake, and this time I made it with gluten-free flour because later today I am going out of town, traveling with my niece, and we're going to her parents' place. She and my brother are both gluten intolerant. Her sister is celiac, so even more so. So I decided to make a gluten-free cake, and it turned out great. I just had a little tiny taste and also cut a few pieces for my sweeties writers group is meeting here today, and so I've got to get this finished before they arrive because I want to have a chance to visit with them before they start the serious business of writing. So on with the books. I mentioned there's 5. 3 of them are 5-star reads, so all 3 of those are going to be at the end. I'm going to start with a couple of audiobooks. First off, Under the Henfluence. This is subtitled Inside the World of Backyard Chickens and the People Who Love Them. It's by Tove Danovich, read by the author. I will read anything to do with chickens, even though I am allergic to them. I'm sensitive to their meat. This is an allergy specialist who told me this. Not that I was intending on eating chickens anyway. I know that I'm allergic to the eggs and to the feathers, sewing down pillows and so on. And I even discovered that I'm allergic to chicken spit. I can tell you that story. I spent a year working on organic farms. In 2002, I had a year off from work, and I wanted to get away from computers and be outdoors, so I spent the year woofing. And at a farm in the south of Spain, there were about 15 or so chickens that were running loose, and we had just seeded a vegetable garden, and they kept digging up the seeds because they could fly. They did roost in the trees at night, and they would go over the fence into the garden. So I was told, round them all up, put them in the chicken coop. I'd never caught chickens before. Even though I grew up on a farm, we never had chickens. My dad hated chickens. So I learned how to catch chickens, but one of them, she got past me and nipped me on the ear a little bit, and it bubbled up with eczema. I was so itchy. You know, I really reacted to her spit, so that's how I know. And one of the next farms that I was at in southern France, they had chickens already, but no roosters, and they acquired a rooster from someone, and that evening the rooster didn't want to go into the pen with the rest of the hens. He wasn't used to being there, and so we had to catch him. Now there were 2 other woofers there who didn't have a clue about catching chickens, and I just caught him, put him in. I now know how to catch chickens. But as Tove mentions in this Under the Henfluence, chickens can run up to 9 miles an hour, so they can be pretty swift. To get back to the book, it is a memoir of moving from an urban place, Brooklyn, to Portland, where she was able to realize her dream of having pet hens, and the bonds that humans can make with chickens and responding to them as individuals is really well done in this book. She also talks about ethics, because in many cities where you can have chickens, roosters are not allowed. And so what happens to all the male chickens? So this is an issue in here. She also talks about battery hens and how they are treated. So it's not all sweetness and light, although you can skip those chapters if you want. It did make me think of some other chicken-related things, books like Annie Potts has a book all about chickens. It's just called Chicken, and it's in the Reaction Animal series. It covers the biology, the mythology, all kinds of information about humans and chickens and how we've related to each other across millennia, really. And there's a really funny Canadian novel called The Woefield Poultry Collective by Susan Juby. It's got a different title in the States. Home to Woefield, I think, is the title there. And the story that she tells us in this novel is a little bit similar to Tove Danovich's story, because in the Woefield Poultry Collective, a young woman inherits property on Vancouver Island, and she moves from Brooklyn to this little farm where there are sheep and chickens, and hilarity ensues. It's quite fun. And another really funny, true story about chickens is in a documentary called Pecking Order from New Zealand from 2017. I'm going to link a trailer to that below to give you an idea. And the other audiobook that I listened to is called Sky Wolf's Call, The Gift of Indigenous Knowledge. It is by Eldon Yellowhorn, who's an Albertan Piikani Blackfoot educator. That he wrote this together with Kathy Lowinger. And the audiobook is read by Derek Roux and Wahsontí Kirby. This is an all ages audiobook, and for younger readers, like I'm talking 11 years old and up, but for younger readers, the print copy might be more attractive. There are a lot of photos and other types of illustrations, and in the audiobook, the narrator describes each picture. I don't feel like I missed out on anything. It's a general overview. It's all about Indigenous knowledge, as the subtitle indicates, and main principles that come through across many Indigenous cultures and communities are that everything is connected, that the world is a gift, that the sacred is a vital part of knowing, and that we are always learning. One thing that was entirely new to me that I learned in this book is that Toledo, Ohio, passed the Lake Erie Bill of Rights in 2019, and this means that citizens in Toledo can act as legal guardians of the lake, and they can sue when there's harm or pollution affecting the lake. Way back in, I think it was something like 2016, I came across 3 references to trepanation within a short period of time in 3 different books. And I started collecting on my book blog references to trepanation. Each time that I find it, it's a surprise. And there was one in this book as well. I will be adding to my blog for that reason. And I think I already mentioned, I recommend this audiobook or the print edition for all ages. The next book I'm going to tell you about is one that took me 2 times borrowing from the library, and I had to wait because there was a long waiting list in between, but it's not a book that I could rush through. It's called Ordinary Notes by Christina Sharpe. Christina Sharpe is a queer Afro-American intellectual who now lives in Canada. She teaches at York University, and I believe she's on faculty at other universities as well. dealing with the subject of blackness, gender, queer studies, class, all of that stuff. And this book is like a collection of thoughts, memories, observances of things from culture, from history, that add up into a careful study of contemporary anti-black racism in both the US and Canada. There are photographs, like one of a crowd of young people reacting to the first black family to move into a white community in 1963 in a place called Fulcroft, Pennsylvania. Christina Sharpe grew up in Pennsylvania, so this was happening very close to where she lived. And when she looks at this photo and the description of it, the beginning of the caption reads, "Youngsters jeer as moving men tote possessions of the Horace Baker family up the steps of their new home in the formerly all-white Delmar Village development." So, yeah, August 30th, 1963. And what Sharpe writes is, "The boy with the belt wrapped around his hand. I faced that white boy almost every day." So much hatred in that photograph, and they are called youngsters, as if those ecstasies of racial hatred and the stolid confidences of white supremacist violence are simply them practicing their rituals of passage. And she goes on in another note to talk about specific experiences that she had as a young child, encountering white boys her age and them calling her names and spitting in her face and that sort of thing. There are so many passages that really struck me in this book. I read it in ebook format, and I probably bookmarked about 25 different sections. I could have bookmarked the whole thing. I really appreciate the care and attention that Sharpe takes in noting these examples of what it's like to be black today. When I started reading it, I thought, oh, this really reminds me of Claudia Rankine's essay collection, Just Us. And then there's a section where Sharpe criticizes Claudia Rankine's video that she did with her husband. It was a video essay about violence against black people in America. Anyway, very, very interesting. In another section, she talks about an exhibition of lynching photographs. I think this was in Birmingham, Alabama, in a museum there. And she looks at the difference between museum goers who are black going to see this exhibit and white museum goers. And what if the white project was to find out the name of every person, every white person who was portrayed in those photographs or had their portrait taken, or the people in the background, and investigate what their circumstances were like before and after the lynching, and what connections that there are to their economic circumstances, and so on. A passage that really struck me is this line, "Every memorial and museum to atrocity already contains its failure." She's also really careful about her use of the word we, and that has made me pay more attention to when I say we. Who's we? Who am I talking about? Am I talking about other lesbians, other white lesbians, other white people in general? Who is that we? And I like books that make me think. This one, I appreciate it so very much. Sharpe talks about how, again, what we bring to the art, what our history is, what our identity is, changes how we view something. And there's a collection of poetry that I'd like to mention that does something a little bit similar to what Christina Sharpe is doing here. It's a book called How She Read by Chantal Gibson. Oh, and speaking of reading, that's another thing. When Christina Sharpe was about 10 years old, she started to have a lot of stomach pains and troubles, and her mother took her to the doctor, who said that Chantal needed to play outside more and stop reading so much. She says, my mother was furious. She was convinced that Dr. Foster would never tell a white child to read less. How could I explain to him that my stomach pains were not the result of too many books, but of too much of the everyday racism that I experienced? Books were not the cause of the harm. They helped mitigate its effects. Yeah, fantastic, very thought-provoking, important book. So, speaking of racism, next I have a picture book, Love in the Library. It's by Maggie Tokuda-Hall with illustrations by Imamura. This is based on a true story. The author's grandparents met at a prison camp for Japanese Americans who were incarcerated there after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And she explains about this in an author's note at the back. I'm just going to read a little bit of the author's note. It's 2 pages long. Robbed of their rights and their dignity, the Americans who found themselves in squalor and destitution made the best of their lives that they could in the camps. And that, to me, is the great wonder of this story, that even under those circumstances, that terrible injustice, Tama and George found love. This is not to say that it was worth it. Their improbable joy does not excuse virulent racism, nor does it minimize the pain, the trauma, and the deaths that resulted from it. But it is to situate it into the deeply American tradition of racism. As much as I would hope this would be a story of a distant past, it is not. It's very much the story of America here and now. The racism that put my grandparents into Minidoka is the same hate that keeps children in cages on our border. It's the myth of white supremacy that brought slavery to our past and allows the police to murder black people in our present. It's the same fear that brings Muslim bans. It's the same contempt that creates voter suppression, medical apartheid, and food deserts. The same cruelty that carved reservations out of stolen sovereign land that paved the Trail of Tears. Hate is not a virus, it is an American tradition. And when I was looking into more information about the author and this book, I discovered that Maggie Tokuda-Hall was the recipient of racism herself in regards to this book. Her publisher asked her to tone down the racism talk in the author's note at the end. And I'm just going to mention that Candlewick, the publisher, did ask her to write an author's note for context of this story. Anyway, she wouldn't back down, and the publisher apologized, and it was printed as is. But the other thing that I learned in this article in Publishers Weekly is Tokuda-Hall said that since this book was published, she's been on the receiving end of hate mail. She said when it was first published, she was getting about 1 a week. Now it's down to about 1 a month. I will link this article down below if you want to find out more about that. Anyway, the picture book is really well done. At the Edmonton Public Library, they have put it in the children's section, like the middle grade section, as opposed to for preschoolers, which I think is the appropriate place to put it. So I would say probably about grade 4 and up, all the way into high school. It's a really good introduction to the Japanese internment camps in the US, and we have them in Canada too. Now, the last book I'm going to tell you about is a novel by J.D. Derbyshire called Mercy Jean, and it is autofiction where the character in this novel is also J.D., formerly called Janice. The in-person J.D. Derbyshire is a stand-up comic and also a playwright. Some of the material for this novel, their debut, came from the stand-up material and plays. There's one called Certified that I would love to see. In that one, this is what they have to say about Certified. One of the symptoms of psychiatric illness is thinking you don't have one when you really do. So I wrote a solo play I perform called Certified, where I turn the audience into a mental health review board. A mental health review board usually consists of 3 people, 2 psychiatrists and another mental health professional, like one of those Hell's Angel nurses I remember so fondly. But I wanted a wider diversity of people determining my sanity, and I couldn't think of a group more suited to the task than people who go to live theater. I give every audience member 3 cards when they come into the theater, a red card, a yellow card, and a green card. I tell them when all is said and done, they will use these cards to vote on my sanity. I tell them my story, and it's funny and sad and then funny again. After 50 minutes, precisely the amount of time you'd have in front of a real mental health review board, I ask each audience member to hold up a card. Red if they think I'm still insane, green if they think I'm sane again, and yellow if they can't quite be certain, but suggest I proceed with caution. Right at the beginning, they talk about their name. Some people know me as Jan Derbyshire. I prefer JD. My parents are still partial to Janice. I chopped the ice off Janice in grade 9. Everyone was fine with that except my parents and the government. I would have chopped nice off the end, but that would have left me as simply Ja, yes, in German. I didn't think I could pull that off. I had a nickname as a kid on sports teams and with friends, JD. That's what I use now. Outwardly, JD works as my initials. Inwardly, I know JD stands for my true name, Joshua Dandelion, a genderqueer, lesbian woe-boy who can make the sun stop in its tracks and is seen as a weed but has incredibly useful properties. JD wrote this book for Janice and Jan. It took me a while to figure out that woe-boy is a play on woman. Oh boy, I'm not even sure how to say it. But look at all my flags. I just love the way that JD writes. This is an utter delight. It's also heartbreaking. It's a story about how do you live when you constantly hear voices. Living with severe mental illness. It got me in the heart, got me in the feels. I have also a Tim Hortons reference to add to my blog. Maybe I'll read that section as well. This one's titled, Once You've Gone Mad, You Know the Way. It was 3 a.m. and they did ask, but still, going through the Timmy Ho's drive-thru to grab donuts and coffees with the paramedics, driving me all the way out to the Chilliwack Hospital because the psych ward at St. Paul's downtown was stacked to the brim with nut bars and Looney Tunes was unnecessarily surreal. I mean, come on. There's a time and a place for double doubles and chocolate glaze, and it's probably not when you've got a suicidal basket case shelved on the gurney in the back. What's true is that they likely couldn't have considered such an early morning snack with any other kind of patient rattling around in the back, and they were sock monkey tired. 5 overdoses and 1 ridiculous car crash already that shift, and I was like a free ride. And also, for the record, I was saying over and over again, "It's okay, it's okay, it's okay." They didn't get that I was saying it to try to keep the voices calm and carry on because I was scared shitless, thinking a person like me doesn't want to end up in a place like Chilliwack, which is more or less exactly what the physiotherapist said to me when she shook me awake to throw the medicine ball around with the other crazies at 6 a.m. A girl like you doesn't want to end up in a place like this. Then came breakfast, porridge, tang, and a prayer led by the hospital chaplain who went from table to table, insisting that everyone hold hands to better connect with the Savior. It turned out to be a good preparation for my first appointment with the born-again Christian psychiatrist, which also took place in the cafeteria. He wore one of those little 10-week-old baby feet anti-abortion pins on the lapel of his serious gray suit, and told me a story about a woman he knew who found Jesus and wasn't bipolar anymore. He asked, "Do you want to be bipolar anymore?" Highly recommend this trans debut novel, Mercy Jean. And that's all I got for you today. Thank you so very much for watching, and I've got one little short video clip to add at the end. Last time I was at the library, I saw that they had the history of pride flags up over the book return slots. And I thought, you go, Edmonton Public Library. It was great to see that. Happy Pride, everyone. Take care, and I will see you soon. Bye for now.